Hi, I'm Dr. Annandale, and in this video, I'm going to talk about section 2 of this book, Josef Pieper's The Christian Idea of Man. At the end of the video, I'll show you up close what this little blue thing on the shelf behind me is. Section 2 is titled The True Concept of Virtue and the Hierarchy of the Virtues. And Pieper begins by noting that in his own time, in 1949, the word virtue has fallen on hard times. He quotes a famous literary figure to the effect that one only hears the word virtue today in jokes, in church, and in academic discussions. There may be some reasons for this. Pieper entertains the idea that perhaps this is the fate of all great words. Words that describe important realities are used quite a lot. Eventually they are overused, their meaning and use is appropriated and misappropriated by others, and the meaning eventually drifts into cliche, and people disregard it and discard it. It may also be, Pieper says, that the term virtue has fallen prey to a modern tendency to sneer at what is good, to regard goodness as being something naive and ridiculous and an object of jest. But he says finally, it certainly is the case that Christian thinkers have done a poor job of communicating to the general public just what virtue is and what virtue means, the role of virtue in a well-lived life. And that, of course, is part of the situation that this book is intended to remedy, to give us a clearer understanding of just what virtue means. He tells us part of what virtue means at the bottom of the second page of this section. He writes, "Virtue does not mean nice and orderly behavior in relation to isolated instances of doing or leaving undone." So we shouldn't fall into the trap of thinking that virtue is a kind of rare quality that one might call on in exceptional occasions when heroism is demanded. So I might think of a person who is honest in the sense that, well, the one time in 5 years that she found a wallet with money in it on the ground, she returned it to the person who dropped it without taking any money from it. So she had the necessary honesty to perform that one action, that one isolated time. This would amount to reducing virtue to a kind of exceptional capacity to be used only rarely. So, for example, if I learned just a little bit of Spanish, I might be able to, when somebody asks me a question in Spanish, respond, and I would say, well, that's what I studied Spanish in high school for, so I could respond to that guy's question at the airport. But it's not useful in my day-to-day life. It's the kind of thing that I sort of keep on reserve as a sort of special quality that might help me on the rare occasions when it's demanded. Pieper continues. I'm sorry, this is not the correct way to think about virtue. What is the correct way? Well, Pieper tells us next. Instead, virtue means that the person is right in both the supernatural and the natural sense. So here again is our shift from thinking about isolated actions, heroic, virtuous actions, to thinking about virtuous character as a stable possession. The honest person is not just a person who is able to be honest on the occasions when honesty is demanded. The honest person is herself, deep down, oriented towards honesty, oriented towards truth-telling in a fundamental way. We are, as Mojo Nixon might say, getting existential here. We'll see more of this in what's to come. Pieper goes on to identify two different problems that a Christian approaching this idea of virtue might face. First, we might become moralistic. We might begin to think of virtue and goodness as isolated from our daily activities, as something that is better than our ordinary daily run of life. Or we might fall prey to a kind of supernaturalism, which holds that holiness and goodness is above the mere virtues of our nature, that being merely virtuous in a natural sense is not enough to please God, is not enough to arise to a truly supernatural goodness. Both of these, Pieper says, are mistakes. On page 11 of this section, Pieper then goes on to give us, I think, a very good one-sentence definition of virtue. He begins by saying, virtue in the quite general sense raises the level of existence of the human person. And here's that existential turn I was referring to earlier. he quotes Thomas to the effect that virtue is the ultimate potential of the human being. So when we are being ourselves, when we are living out human existence to the highest possible degree, that is when we are realizing the virtues. And he writes, page 11, the virtuous person exists in such a way that, from the innermost tendency of his being, he realizes the good through his actions. So there's a good one-sentence definition. What do we have? We have virtue, honesty, courage, and the like is a fundamental orientation of the self at the level of one's existence. It's a matter of existing in the world in such a way that you, on a regular, habitual basis, tend to act well, to realize the good successfully through your actions. So we might think of what it means to be courageous. I'm recording this right around the anniversary of 9/11. What does it mean to be a courageous firefighter? It means not simply to be possessed of a kind of extraordinary quality of heroism that you can draw upon in an extraordinary circumstance, facing death. It means instead to be oriented as a person in your daily act of existing in such a way that your actions will, on a regular basis, bring about the good in the world that the virtue of courage is oriented towards. So we think a courageous firefighter exists as a man in a certain sort of way, in an admirable sort of way, we would say. But it's precisely that way that makes him prepared to charge into a burning building if that's called upon. It's precisely that way of existing that gives him the faculty of judgment to decide that building is about to come down. It's not prudent to go into that building at this time. So we'll see more about this when we look at the specific virtues next. But virtue is a fundamental existential possession or orientation of the human self that then is realized in action and the results of action. So if we look just at the actions and the results of the actions, we're not going deep enough to actually grasp what a virtue truly is, according to Pieper. In the final paragraph of this section, Pieper speaks about the hierarchy of virtues. In addition to knowing what virtue is and having a correct concept of virtue, we also want to be clear about how the virtues are ranked within themselves. For the Christian, obviously, the highest and most important virtue is the supernatural love of God and neighbor that we often call charity. If you know the famous passage from 1 Corinthians about faith, hope, and love, you've heard this before, perhaps in the readings, scripture readings at weddings. Beneath charity, as the chief virtue, we have the theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity, being of a higher order than the natural or cardinal virtues of courage, justice, prudence, and the like. In the next 5 sections of the book, Pieper is going to talk about these specific virtues and groups of virtues. We will turn to the virtue of prudence next in section 3. Before I get to the end of the video, let me show you, as I promised, this blue thing on the shelf behind me. This is a little blue origami 3-headed dragon that my youngest daughter, made for me. She found the instructions in a book. This is a King Ghidorah dragon, and I think it looks really fantastic. The wings, the tail, the 3 heads again. So pleased to have it on my shelf here in my office. So that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll enjoy the next video in the series. Thanks for watching today. Goodbye.